So this is where we left off with the life. And this one is about half pictures. And it only has 3 poems, but they're kind of long. Not as long as the last of the 3 poems in this book, which is the one that came out right before it. Tumulu is South American, one of a pair of South American primordial gods. They're the twin brothers of light and darkness, and they're jaguars most of the time. And Tumulu is the primordial god of darkness, who is the story of him is that he's the buffer against light, because the light is seen as a really aggressive force and a really damaging force. Like the light of the sun is very burning, the light of the lightning is kind of under Tumulu's domain, but it's also seen as a kind of shield against that light. And I thought that was really interesting, that the god of darkness was the protective force. In a lot of stories, the darkness is the destructive force, or is seen as is seen as death as a bad thing, or as either always meaning entering the underworld or the other world, or being a bad thing, or both. And in this, it was the total opposite, because he's a sky god. He's a cloud god, which was awesome because it was the dark clouds, which I just couldn't love more. And the poems in this, so I had a problem with etymologists. I discovered that I had a problem with etymologists quite on accident, and I didn't know this when I discovered etymology. I just thought, oh, this is awesome, I want to learn more about this. So I started learning more about this, and then, as I got better at it and I started learning things, just because you started learning things, I started to see inconsistencies, and I became a little mistrustful. It's like, that's incorrect, and more this, this isn't a new experience for me, so I guess I just eased my way right into it with etymology. But I wanted to know about azurite, and about the color blue specifically. Specifically in ancient art, I heard of it spoken of by some scholars in terms of interchangeability with black. And it's easy to acknowledge, yes, sometimes that happened, but sometimes it was put on some people when it didn't happen. They had a differentiation between black and blue that was both visual and verbal and communicable, and I was interested in blue. And I love azurite anyway, like, who doesn't love azurite? It's real pretty. And this is just the story just occurred to me. There was a pagan festival that I went to a few times as a girl, and a couple times as an adult, or vice versa. I only went to it a few times overall. The first time I went, I was 15, and then I went a couple times as a grown person. But at this festival, they would have like workshops, and everyone would camp out, and there would be like a vendor's row, and there would be opening ceremonies and closing ceremonies, and there would be all these rituals, and it was really amazing. I especially fondly remember the drum circles around the fire, where so much magic happened. I think that it would be hard to imagine my life having the capacity for wonder and pleasure and delight and awe, really awe, like that primordial awe. If I hadn't had those experiences dancing around a fire to drums and looking up at the stars and having the clouds be so important to everything that you're doing, you know, I would be an entirely different person. And those were just such important moments. And there was a giving tree at them. There was like a whole giving tree event. And one year I went, I didn't often have much to give, and so this one year I was like, oh, I'm going to make something to give. And so I made something to give. And then I was going to go give it to the tree, and I gave it to the tree. And you're supposed to give something and take something. That's part of the deal. And I see these two, okay, so walking up, there's like hollows everywhere that you could be. And there's a couple of guys just kind of hidden away, so you can't see them when you first walk in to the area. So go up, I set the thing down, and then I noticed the guys, you know, because I'm trying to find the right place, because mine was kind of, it had water in it, so I had to find a good place where I could stabilize it. So it took me a minute, and then noticed the guys. People were kind of buzzing around the tree like human bees, and it was wonderful. And so I'm looking around, and there's some cool stuff, you know, stuff that I couldn't really afford to buy myself, and things that you're supposed to get as gifts, and you're not supposed to buy. And they were all very tempting, and some of them were very, very beautiful and elaborate, and it was amazing. Like, people were so generous, and I was kind of taken aback, and I started to be like, oh, my gift isn't that awesome. Like, you know, comparatively, I thought, oh, man, I should probably just tone it down, you know, and take something like what I thought I had given. And then, like a miracle, I saw in the little crook of the tree, kind of hidden, was just a bag of sand, like brown sand. It wasn't like fancy sand with like pink or white or black or anything. It was just beige sand. And it was like, oh, this is awesome, like, because you can't really get sand out here. And I'm landlocked. Yeah, anyway. And you need sand for a good sensor, and I had just gotten like this nice sensor, and you can't really put dirt in it, and it's not the same with rocks, and it's a whole thing. So I was so excited about this sand. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna match my gift, walk out of here all jazzed. And so I take up the bag, and then there's something in it, and I keep walking, you know, I keep walking, I don't stop, and until I figure out what's in the bag. Feeling around, and it pops out of the sand as I'm like a good distance from the tree. And it's the most beautiful, I don't know, like a cabochon. I'm like, it's lapis lazuli. I've learned a little bit about stones, so it's like it's probably a low grade A, but definitely an A, and it's beautiful. I mean, to me it's like, whoa, this is awesome, and it's huge. It's like big, and it's egg shaped, and it's got this little hollow in it, and so you don't have to use it and enjoy it. It doesn't have any sharp edges. You could just use it as a fidget, or, you know, put like a tiny sphere in it or something. And I kind of felt, this is gonna sound kind of weird, but yeah, I mean, I felt like really rewarded for the humility of the choice. And it seemed like the person who put that there did that on purpose. Like, somebody went and put it there and made sure that it was hidden, because you couldn't see it, you know, and that took effort, because, you know, the thing on the sand will always float to the top. And that's when I noticed those guys, and they were looking at me. They had put it there, and they were like, cool. And they weren't like trying to engage with me at all. They were just like, excellent choice. And I kept walking, and it was awesome. It was really awesome. And I mean, I love stones generally, so it was super cool. And I wanted to know more about the origin of names. I want to know everything, so that was included, and I got around to it, and I was like, these etymologists are talking out there. something or another, because this is incorrect. And I kept coming up with different names and different things, and I was like, they're not talking to each other. You could tell everybody's got their own thing going on, and there is no collaboration here allowed, like a whole bunch of Highlanders or something. So I came across a few things, and one of them in particular was lazur, which, so, for the me, you know, a year ago who didn't know, lapislazzuli, the word lazour, it comes from a place that it's now like Turkmenistan, or it was Turkmenistan, and now it's the map changes a lot. So, but this place in Turkmenistan was specifically called, it was like the Lazur province, and that's what it was called. It was named after this place. And I knew from researching There Were Three, the previous book, that, and from a bunch of, and from some other things, but because I did There Were Three, I had to do a bunch of research on the different pantheons around the world and try to go back as far as I could. And so of course I did Sumer, so of course I knew about Abzu, which was the primordial water god. And you know, I wasn't interested in Abzu. I was interested in Namu and the true name of Nerthus, which I don't know if I will ever find, but I was interested in Namu. I was like, okay, that's pretty close, you know, they'd probably have a common ancestor or something. But along the way I learned about Abzu. And so when I learned about lazur, I was like, really though, you don't think Abzu has anything to do with it? And it just bothered me. It just was one of those things that got under my skin. And so then there's Azul, which that was the first answer that I got, was Azul, which is a non-answer. And it pissed me off. Things like that just kind of bother me, and I have to learn more and just see what I can find. And I don't know, I just felt like it belonged with Tumulu, maybe because they were both kind of water gods. Like, one of them was a underground water god, one of them was above, like a air water god, but they were both kind of both. And I mean, it would be easy to say, yeah, everything's all connected, because it is. And, you know, if you want to approach things in a scholarly way, you won't be taken seriously if you make connections that you can't prove. It'll just be taken to be spurious unless you're very reputable. But the more I learn, the more things are the same, and I definitely learned that more than I thought was possible with There Were Three. So, anyway, Azul is a very long poem from Tumulu, which addresses integration, among other things. And I put that whole poem up. It's got some things in it that are hard to talk about, and it was speaking to my last video about talking about ideas in a more disciplined and strict sense than people in events, but you know, the mutual necessity of them and all this, which I have been concerned. I've concerned myself from a very early age with ideas and people, and events, you know, inspire interest in them both. And with Tumulu, I wanted to address some a work situation that I had been in for a very long time that was very detrimental to my life generally. Like, it just sucked so hard. And, you know, no work situation is perfect, but much like any self-descriptor, you know, a person, place, or thing that thinks it's invisible to invincible to corruption is probably more susceptible to corruption than the average Joe, who's like, oh yeah, that could totally happen to me, I'm on the lookout. And yeah, I ended up working in a place that had many a reputation and lived up to one. And I chose not to name anybody. You know, I don't often. It's very rare that I name people in works. You know, it's tricky. So that was never on the table, but a lot of the names can be found. Like, I'm a public citizen. You can see my, you know, it's around. So when I do name someone, I know that these people can be found. So I don't, even not putting their name in, sometimes by relation you can figure things out. It's really not hard. And I had to make some decisions. Like, am I gonna, because these people's names can be discovered quite easily, should I go ahead and talk about some of the things that happened publicly like that, like put it down in works, because that's a harsh choice. And I decided to do that with some of the information, and because it addressed an idea. I left out probably what I should have left in, you know, some of the most damning stuff, but I only left in what I needed to talk about the thing that I wanted to talk about, because I needed this person and this event to illustrate this idea. And it's hard to talk about things when you want to be kind and compassionate and just and also fair to yourself and the people around you, who are going to be affected by your decision to speak or not speak. And I must say, you know, if I had had some warning before some situations, sometimes it would have made a difference. And so I just want to keep that in mind, that telling the truth is more important than anyone's feelings, and sometimes people earn their reputations and sometimes they don't, and you know, people have to make their own choices about who they trust and who they pursue knowledge of, based on what knowledge is ambiently available. And, you know, I think that sometimes if a person's reputation precedes them and you trust that source, then it would be perfectly reasonable for you to avoid being in certain situations with, you know, said person. being said, I'm sure I have many reputations, and how would I know if I had lived up to any of them, not knowing what they are? So I try to keep that in mind when people say things to me about somebody. You know, I usually need some evidence of that on my own. And if I don't get it, then I go a little bit further in the relationship. But it's tricky. It's tricky to talk about things that are necessary to talk about, and I chose to do it with an unreliable narrator because I worked in a restaurant for a while. There were things about restaurant life that I thought were very illustrative of, I don't know, just very revealing about culture, about the cultural temperature, how people are, who people are, what people are. You know, there's there's a lot going on, and that was that. There Were Three, the book that I was talking about before. I'm gonna go ahead and make a long video and ramble. It's gonna be awesome. This is the one that I did all the research for. For those who know, I started learning about Wicca specifically when I was 13, and I took to it like a fish, like a duck in water. I mean, I just had no trouble. You're like, oh, this is better, and went from there. You know, I'm not a terribly religious person, but I am very interested in religions. Not so much the sky god religions that bore the shit out of me, but the religions that came before. I very interested in their pantheons, and not so much the Greeks. I mean, the Greeks are also really boring, so I mean, they're like pre-Etruscan and not necessarily Mesopotamian, although, you know, there's a lot buried there, a lot unearthed there. So there's a lot from there to work with, but there's so much from all over, and I wanted to learn more about what was going on in other places. Because I found the deities that I had already encountered, especially in the Celtic and Norse pantheons, so enriching, so compelling. I think of deities a lot like language, and symbols generally. I think sounds are shaping, and I see them as like energetic pools that you can draw on, that you can figure, that you can take from. And I think, you know, like use of a particular letter or word or sound, particularly the sounds, you know, because the assigned symbols are hieroglyphics of a sound, if you like. Those things are made to kind of translate what's being expressed in your face with your meats, and and so I think those sounds are like the basic building blocks of sound are really fascinating, and the relationship between the symbols that we assign to them, and then the meanings that they tend to have, I think that's really interesting. And So I think about deities a lot in the same way because they're kind of symbolic expressions of these natural phenomena that we have very intimate relationships with, like the rain and the storm and the river and the mountain and the night sky, you know, and the fire. Like that's, they're, I'm a kind of person that thinks that everything's magical. And so for maybe, you know, if you're not into that, if everything's magical, then nothing is magical. That's fine. But I look at fire and I could totally, you know, there's a relationship there, like with the rain or the mountain or the forest, like the whole entity of a forest that is everything to me. That's magical. I mean, really, on a cellular level, on an atomic level, that's just miraculous. And there's no end of delight and awe in that. And those concepts are pretty much universally expressed. The experience of being alive, being human, being able to anticipate tomorrow and remember yesterday and feel warm around the fire and know how to make it, and to celebrate the rain. Those are the things that matter. And our ancestors built these deities around them or celebrated them as these holy entities, and I think that's a really good idea. I think that's just beautiful. Even though, you know, I don't think like, oh, there's a, you know, bearded guy gonna be like, well, okay, this time. But especially like Tabidi, the Scythian, she's the primordial goddess, the creatrix, and she's the goddess of the hearth. And I love that. They're a warlike people, horse riders, but their primary deity was the goddess of the hearth. How could I not love that? Like, and all of them are like that. Every place the deities spring up, they're like that. And I was going for the primordial ones, so it pointed to what was important to them, what they felt most connected to or nurtured by. And I think that's really interesting. But I didn't want to do it in such a dead way, because that's no fun. Because that the joy, the magic of that is in the living of it, which isn't studying etchings on stone from long ago, although that's magical in its own way. It's in the dancing, in the feeling the fire, in the hearing the drums, and the making the sound. I mean, if you've ever played a musical instrument in a band, it's really like it's a trip, because you hear these eruptions of sound going on around you, and you know that you're a part of it. And God, when you're a dancer, it's very much the same. And I think that's maybe part of it, that feeling that you're a part of the trees and the stars and the fire and the rain and the mountain and the river. Like the oracle shells talked about. So anyway, this is where I really got into the Proto-Indo-European studies, which I didn't go into in as much depth as a real scholar. Fuck.